that we used to, and when that was decided, I was Hi, welcome to Vermont Democrats. I'm Jim Holway, sitting in for Bob Hooper. Today we're going to be talking about some issues out in the New North End in Burlington as we are thinking about the March elections that are coming up soon. We have Sarah Carpenter here, who is running for City Council in Ward 4, and Kienan Christensen, who is a community volunteer and community active organizer. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks, Jim. My name is Sarah Carpenter, and I've thrown my hat in the ring to run for City Council in Ward 4. I'm a lifelong resident of Burlington and a recent retiree from the Vermont Housing Finance Agency, and as well had a long career at Cathedral Square Housing, and felt like it was time for me to get more involved with my neighborhood.
Great. And Kienan?
So Sarah, I guess, as we get started with this, what made you decide to run for City Council?
Well, as I said, I had a long career with VHFA and it was wonderful, had the opportunity to deal a lot with statewide issues, statewide policies, but I missed the local work. When I was with Cathedral Square and even before that with the Champlain Valley Agency on Aging, I got to be involved with more municipalities and towns, and that's where the action is. And when I did all the state work, I realized to get things done, you really need to be active locally, and I've got the time and the energy now to do that and feel like maybe I can contribute some of my experience to the Burlington City Council.
That's great.
Great. What do you think are some of the pressing issues for Burlington and particularly for the folks you'll be representing in Ward 4?
Well, I know that all the city residents want us to continue to have a very viable and livable city, so the council as a whole really needs to continue those efforts and strive to make them happen. We also need to be very concerned about our most vulnerable residents and how we give them the proper supports that they need to have a livable city as well. Ward 4 itself is, of course, impacted by the downtown economy, but I think sometimes we feel quite left out. People view the New North End as some sort of suburban appendage to the city, and it's important. We are a large community. I think something like 40% of the population lives between wards 4 and 7, and we need to make ourselves known. We need to create our own community center. We need to advocate for things like better public transportation, more local services like daycare. Those are important to live in our neighborhoods. We're also one of the wards that's most affected by the lake. We have a lot of lakeshore in Ward 4, and I want to be sure that we're doing all we can to monitor that and taking leadership roles in the region to make some of those things happen.
Yeah, Sarah, I think that's absolutely right. So what do you think the city has done well, and what do you think might need some improvement?
I think the city, Burlington is a thriving community, and maybe some people don't like that, but I'm pleased that we've been able to attract new citizens, attract some new businesses here. We need that growth in Burlington, but we're experiencing some growing pains, and I think sometimes in the efforts to grow, we maybe haven't been as forthright and transparent and even as thoughtful, and so we really need to make sure that we include the residents in some of the new initiatives and the decisions that are being made.
Yeah. And what are some of the things you hope to accomplish while you're in the City Hall?
Well, as I said, I've had a lot of experience in government, spent a lot of time with committees and trying to get to yes. And as an observer from the outside for now, I've been a little frustrated with some of the divisiveness I hear in the City Council and the city meetings. The Council's role is to guide the operation of a very large organization. And we need to approach our decision making in a very fair and practical way. We need to offer a balanced point of view, and we need to make decisions in the context about how do we serve all of our citizens. We can't be focused on one particular group. I think I'm a pretty independent thinker, and so hopefully I can bring that to the table, and at the same time build consensus. I'm used to working with groups that are divided, and I'd like, at least in my first year, to contribute to the decision-making process in a thorough and fair way.
And I think that's really great, Sarah. And I love that the focus is on both the city and Ward 4. And I'm sort of curious as to what kinds of things you'll do to promote economic growth in the New North End.
Economic growth is hard to wrap your arms around. It really starts with individual entrepreneurs, property owners. They start businesses. But I think we have more of a blank slate in the New North End. I think there's more opportunities. It's a good, thriving neighborhood, and I think the city needs to help that happen. I mean, I look at the work the city has done on Pine Street in the South End, and it's great, and I would like to see the city really maybe put some focus in the New North End and look at what we can do with some infill businesses, some entrepreneurial work, and get us more services at the same time.
Good. I want to remind people, if you want to call in and ask questions, to give a call at 862-3966, and we'll be happy to take a question from you. Just curious, what do you think about the taxes in Burlington? You feel they're too high, too low? What are your thoughts around that?
The perennial question. People always have opinions on taxes. For me, I think examining what I've seen, I think the Burlington taxes are fair. We get a lot of services for what we pay, and I've worked with lots of communities around the state and seen much higher taxes for a lot less services. So I think it's important for taxpayers to sort of analyze, what are we getting for our money? It is important to point out that only about 30% of our taxes are municipal services. 70% or so are school taxes. School taxes are set by the school board, municipal taxes by the city council. So, we need to sort of focus on the relative merits of that. Property taxes are not the fairest way to raise revenue, but that is our system at the moment, and I hope that all of our listeners are very aware of the Vermont property rebate forms, both available for homeowners and renters, and sometimes people don't take that into consideration when they look at their total tax burden, and there's many taxpayers that are eligible for those rebates and should pay attention. There is going to be a small increase on the municipal tax rate for this ballot. I believe we've not had an increase since 2014, which is pretty darn good. It's I think around 1.5%, and I think it's definitely worthy of our support. It supports a lot of services. I actually discovered, if you look on the back of your tax bill, it lists all the services that cover the rate, and I encourage people to do that. One of the tax things which I'm pleased to see is 1/2 of 1 cent for the city's housing trust fund, and affordable housing is a big issue. 1/2 of 1 cent doesn't raise a lot, but it puts a little bit of our money on the table to try to tackle that problem.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting point, focusing on sort of where our tax dollars are going, and I think that's really intuitive of you. And I want to sort of focus in on your background on housing and sort of get your thoughts on the kinds of development that has been happening around Burlington, and just sort of what you think about it.
Well, certainly the degree that we need more housing, I think that's good. We need more homes. People say, oh, why? We really aren't producing housing at such an exponential rate, even though it seems like it is. We're picking away. I think the rate is about 75 units a year. There's some major developments coming online, but I think they're appropriate and we need them. There are more small households. People get confused with more people as opposed to households. Older people are going to smaller households. millennials and folks like you, Keenan. There's a lot of two-person households, and we need housing to support them. And so I'm generally in favor of it. You know, I think if people are not, they need to speak up around zoning regs, but not always be resistant. The other area we've seen some growth, and I think this is good, is around hotels and some of the tourism industry. We need that. I mean, Burlington thrives on tourism. We have the university bringing lots of people in, and I think it helps us to add those kind of amenities to our town.
Great. So I think a lot of people are aware of the downtown city place and the current status and how it's
Hard not to.
Yeah. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are about that and what that might look like.
Well, it's, I think, clear to me and to everyone that the old Burlington Square Mall really needed to be redeveloped. I mean, it had lived way beyond its practical time. But perhaps we went a little too fast, too big. At this point, I don't want to second guess any of the decisions. It's a very complex project. I'm sure I'll be inundated with all the details, but we perhaps should have had a little sharper eye. My first personal reaction was probably too much retail, given what the retail environment is. I'm not as familiar with commercial. I hope that's been right-sized. The whole project is downsized, so I think generally that will be good. Although the housing portion is remaining, I think, more or less the same. And that was the piece I liked the most. I think it's a great spot for these small households we're talking about. Both, again, retirees and young professionals. Those are folks we want in our city, and this will be great housing for them. And we just need to move along in an expeditious but prudent way to get that completed and not make sure the city gets burdened with something it can't handle.
Sure.
That's great. I want to sort of turn from the development and sort of the downtown to sort of you serving on city council. So, Sarah, after your first term on city council, if you're fortunate to get elected, how will voters know you did a good job representing them?
I don't have all the answers to that. You know, everyone's going to have sort of their pet issue, and I hope what I can offer is being very accessible to the constituents, to my neighbors, and try to find answers for them. I think people get frustrated that they can't find an answer to something, or at least find out what's going on. We won't always have the answer, but at least we can start working on it. And hopefully I can contribute to a solution in a thoughtful, balanced way as the city's issues come before the city council. Some of the role of the councilor is to be responsive to issues as they come up and try to guide the city to what I believe will make it a more livable city.
So I think that we've noticed that North End has moved towards more progressive and democratic leanings, although we'll find out when they count the votes. But I'm just curious, you have been endorsed by the progressives and you are seeking the endorsement of the Democrats. Just wondering how will you serve all of the constituents?
Well, that's exactly what I want to do, is serve all the constituents. And I'm not sure I find that so difficult. You know, if you really look at the principles and the values of both the Democratic and the progressive parties, there's very similar. And I think that's what we need to focus on. What do we have in common? What's the end game for us? Each of the parties has people at one end of the spectrum or another end of the spectrum, and I may not agree with people at each end of those spectrums, but I think there's a lot in between, and we really need to come together and sort of see what do we have in common, how do we solve those problems. I mean, I admittedly on the left, and I'm proud of that, and I think we can work together to really strengthen the goals we need for the city.
I love that commitment to bringing folks together. I think it's really great and really important, especially in these divisive times. So I just want to turn to sort of a more lighthearted question. Who is a city councilor that you admire and why?
There have been over the years lots of good counselors, but I'm going to say my dad, Sarah Carpenter. Some of you know this, but I was raised in a Republican family. My dad was a city councilor in the 70s and 80s, right at a time of really great change. I mean, if you think we've got changing times now, this was, think of the late 70s. This was, he was on the Board of Aldermen when Bernie was elected. There was a lot going on in the city. And I didn't always agree with my father and his peers, but he personally really focused on how do you work together and how do you get things done and how do you remain mindful of what is best for the city. And he taught me that. He was also a state legislator, and he really taught me a lot about the value of public service. And so I'm quite grateful that I have that in my background.
Great. Right, I guess I didn't realize that that was your dad. So again, I want to remind folks, 862-3966 is the number to call if you want to ask a question. Just a little, just curious how you feel about what's going on with the police department, the police chief. Give you a hard question there.
That's a toughie, you know. It's always easy to have 20/20 hindsight, particularly around a difficult personnel issue. I've dealt with them many times over the years, but the chief's lapse was a public issue. It involves social media, and I don't think that should have been denied. We needed, I think, to acknowledge the lapse. It was known by others, and whatever personnel actions and proper administration needed to follow. You know, I'm not going to comment on that. That certainly was the mayor's job, but we can't cover up sometimes those things, lapses that happen with personnel. Certainly over the years, public officials have had things like DUIs. You acknowledge it. There's been other kinds of behaviors in the past. You need to acknowledge that and support the personnel, but can't be denying it.
Yeah, fair. So I want to turn to a separate issue. That there's been some choices, some conversations and happenings around City Council about changing sort of how we select our city councilors, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are on ranked choice voting.
Well, that was a very contentious issue, and particularly in the New North End, probably because it was perceived that it tipped an election of a mayor and a candidate from the New North End. I don't know that was it, but it certainly created lots of issues around it. My concern is that we really need to, if we're going to move back to ranked choice voting, we need to make sure everybody is well educated. It is confusing, although it is used in a lot of circumstances. So I guess my thought is let's get out and do the education, the pros and the cons. Let's talk about how it works for the average voter. And when people are well educated, then I think we put it back on the ballot and let folks decide.
Okay. So again, 862-3966 is the number to call if you have a question. We've got about 10 minutes left here, so if you have a question you want to call, that's be a good idea to get that in. So I'm curious about the non-citizen voting. Do you support it? What's your thoughts?
Well, I know, again, folks have some apprehension about it, but when I looked at it a little more, I think the term non-citizen it's a little broad. It raises a lot of thoughts in your head, and I looked it up and I actually wrote it down. This would give voting rights to residents who reside in the United States on a permanent and indefinite basis in compliance with federal immigration. So it's not all non-citizens. It's people who live here, have their home here, operate here. And so I think that's important to keep that in mind, and how do we give those folks representation? For a lot of years, when I worked with the seniors, I had tons of folks who came down from Canada and contributed their whole lives to the city and were not really represented. So I think we need to look at the narrow definition that's on the ballot item and then talk about, and I think be fair around the fact that those neighbors need to be represented as well and encouraged to participate.
Okay, great. So I do hear the phone ringing here. I think maybe we have a question. Is that okay? We'll find out if that's the case. While we're waiting to find out if that is a question for you, tell me about the door, your experience at the doors and meeting people. How's that going?
It's a lot of fun. You know, that was a piece that I was a little nervous about, just cold calling at somebody's home, but everyone has been quite gracious. Some folks are way more talkative than others, so you have sort of a mixed bag, and people seem genuinely interested in letting me know what they're thinking. And it's quite the range from the pothole on my street to fixing climate change. So I'm, and everything kind of in between.
All things you're going to solve in your first term. So we do have a caller, so let me see what they have to say. Hello, you're on the Vermont Democrat. Do you have a question or a comment?
Ask a question of Sarah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead. You might want to turn that speaker down in there at your home.
Sure thing. Hi, I'm here. Yeah, I just have a question for Sarah. Sarah, I think it's great that you're running. I know you're going to do a great job. Can you talk a little bit about some of the regional collaborations that might be?
Sure. Actually, that is one of my platforms, if you want to call it that. I feel really strongly the city needs to be a regional leader. And, you know, we're always perceived as the big gorilla in the room, but many of the things that we need to tackle are regional in nature. I talked about the lake health. A lot of the lake issues don't generate in Burlington. They generate outside of Burlington with farms and infrastructure that's outside of our control. We need to be working with our neighbors. Certainly, the public transportation issue, that's a regional authority. We're a member, but we need to figure out how to get our folks served. Some of the social issues, the opioid crisis isn't just in downtown Burlington, it's all over the county, all over the state or country too. So we really need to work together on that. The homeless issue, even though some of the homeless folks kind of drift downtown where there's more services, it's because of a lack of housing in the region, and we need to do our fair share in Burlington, but so doesn't South Burlington, Colchester, Winooski, Essex. And some of those communities perhaps haven't done as much as Burlington has. So it's our goal. I think the city council perhaps a few years ago was more active that way, and I'd like to see us go back.
Yeah, that's true. Did you have a...
Yeah, you know, so as you know, I'm a community organizer. I've been doing a lot of community organizing in the New North End, and I'm just sort of curious as to, you know, what sort of community development you would focus on as a city councilor.
You mean in terms of organizing residents, or, well, I think the work you all have done actually is such a good step, because again, I think the New North End has maybe seen itself as just a suburban community, and it's a neighborhood. It's several neighborhoods, more than one neighborhood. So how do you get people to focus on we live here, we need to make it better for ourselves? And any of those initiatives like your community dinner, I think, are great. Again, and I think the city itself has to really sort of support that. I think there was an era a number of years ago when maybe we had more support. Certainly the NPA itself had more financial support, and I believe that's actually going to try to happen this next year. City councilors should not be afraid of, you know, wayward, contentious neighbors. They just need to own up and sit down and talk with them about whatever their concerns are.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, the city has this last past year
Yeah.
has added to the resources,
Yeah.
and so I know folks like Keenan, myself, and others who like to see city engagement. We're really appreciative that they did.
Absolutely.
And so, if you want to help more, that's we'll take it. You talked about the region. To a certain degree, the city liaisons with the state on issues too. Do you know of any state issues that you might work with representatives on? Or-
Well, again, though, there's a lot of crossover. I mean, the two biggest ones I can think of are housing and the lake. In fact, on Thursday morning at the Holiday Inn in South Burlington, the Senate Economic and Housing Committee is having a public hearing. So I think if people are interested in looking at a variety of state proposals, I would encourage them to go and follow what's going along with that. Senator Mike Sorokin is honchoing a omnibus housing bill, which will have a number of components on it, and including much needed housing resources, we hope. So I think that will be important for people to follow. Again, the Lake Champlain issue, even though it's on the western side of the lake, is far-reaching in terms of the watersheds and the contributions or issues with agriculture around it. And I was very active in the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, and that really affects Burlington. We can't think of ourselves as just our little downtown, but what is surrounding us.
Do you have another question? So one of the things a lot of folks don't realize about the North End is how many businesses are out there. They're home-based businesses, but we're on a pretty narrow spine, and so it's hard for small businesses to get the word out that they do haircuts in their living room or bake pies to bring to local stores and stuff. Just economic development is really an important part. And I'm just wondering, do you have any thoughts on how you could address maybe a community/business association or something like that out there?
Well, actually, I think that's a good idea, and sad to say, I may not know all those businesses. So, again, a directory, some advertising. I look at the work in the South End. What could we do in the North End? Can't we have some fun festival? The shopping center I acknowledge is a privately owned business, but they've been good neighbors and they have space, and we have the Leddy Park right behind it. Yeah. Can't we get a few festivals into Leddy Park?
Yeah.
We don't see them in our end of the town.
So we're down to our last minute, so I'm wondering if you want to just mention how people can learn more about your candidacy and what are you planning on doing to get the word out?
Well, I'm going to really strenuously continue my door knocking, but I have a website, or I'm going to have a website soon. I have a Facebook page, Carp for Council.
Carp for Council.
Carp for Council.
Like
you can email me at carpforcouncil@gmail.com. So I'd love to hear from you. My phone number is 658-0474, and you'll be able to see that on my Facebook page as well. So let me know what you're thinking. I'm new to this, and I really want to hear from you.
All right. We want to thank Sarah Carpenter, for City Councilor for Ward 4, Kienan Christensen, and this is Jim Holway for Vermont Democrats, and thank you.